At 6:30, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll get a roll call. City Clerk.
Patricia Coughlin.
Here.
John Counts.
Here.
Trish Haynes.
Here.
Bernie Jock.
Here.
Rosemary Mills.
Here.
Ann Peachy.
Here.
And Sharon Spahn.
Here.
Next item is approval of the minutes. Recognize the city manager.
There is one change in the minutes that went out on page 2, section 3.02. The last sentence of the second paragraph should be the last sentence of the first paragraph instead of the second paragraph. So it should be a discussion ensued. It was consensus of the committee not to recommend this change. So that would be under the first paragraph, not the second.
Okay.
Well, I was actually going to bring this up as well. I think it does not accurately reflect as to what happened. I think the discussion ensued, and the recommendation was to table it and then do further research, and then we'd take it up at this meeting, as opposed to not recommending this change. So I would move to amend it to reflect that we decided to table the matter for further discussion at the next meeting, pending further research.
I second that. That's correct.
Madam City Attorney, do we need to approve the minutes, get a motion to approve the minutes, get a second, and then make a motion to amend the minutes?
Someone can make a motion to approve the minutes as amended if there are no further changes. There is a motion and a second on the floor though now, so that motion does need to be voted on or withdrawn.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, the only thing about the, and I asked this question a couple of times, was did the committee want to put it on the next agenda? And I believe the comment by the chair was if it's discussed, it could be discussed under other business.
Yeah, correct.
So there wasn't a definite, it's going to be on
Right.
an agenda, but if it's going to be discussed, it could be discussed under other business.
May I ask a question to clarify? Ann, when you were talking about section 3.02, election and terms,
Yes.
okay, I didn't understand the same thing from that discussion. I understood that we weren't interested in looking into that further.
That the first part, the item brought up by Ms. Peachy, following
Right.
the word mayor,
Okay,
it should say
Oh.
discussion ensued. It was a consensus
So
of the committee
that's-
not to
okay,
recommend.
So we're good. Yeah,
So
we're
you
good.
want that? Okay.
That sentence goes not, that
So we don't
sentence
need an
was
amendment.
not reflective of the discussion on term limits. That was reflective on the prior discussion.
So we can get a motion to approve based on the amendments on the city managers, correct?
Yes.
You can, but there's a current motion
Right, so we
second on
need
the
to either
table,
get
so it
that
has to be either
withdrawn or-
withdrawn or the motion needs to be amended.
Is that withdrawn?
Would you like to withdraw your motion?
Oh, yes, I would.
Okay.
Okay.
Then we can ask for a new motion with the stated amendments from the city manager,
Okay.
if that's...
Need a motion to approve based on the amendments from the city managers.
motion to approve.
Okay. I think we'll do a roll call on this one.
Patricia Coughlin,
Yes.
John Counts,
Yes.
Trish Haynes,
Yes.
Bernie Jock,
Yes.
Rosemary Mills,
Yes.
Ann Peachy,
Yes.
and Sharon Spahn.
Yes.
Motions, minutes are approved. Next, seeing there's no other people in attendance other than the city council, I'll just go ahead and open that to comments from city council / public hearing. Do we have anyone from city council who would like to speak? Seeing no one? Oh, sorry.
So, Mr. Chairman, the minutes will reflect no members of the public appeared.
Yes, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'll pass this around. I'm going to talk about both pages. There's maybe a copy for each other and an extra there you can keep.
Just some housekeeping, just to, for everyone, we will let the city council members speak. There's, for interaction, I don't think we'll need to do that. We can address that before we wrap up. Moving.
Oh, wait, I got more here. Oh, sorry. Just an extra one. Just,
And hoarding documents.
yeah, well, what else is new?
Need one for that.
We moving down, just for the city attorney. Okay.
Do we have a copy for the city clerk?
Yes, there's a 10th copy there.
Do
There
we
should
have
be.
another? Go ahead. I guess so. Okay.
I have another copy here I can give you.
Erica.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right, I have 3 items I wish to speak to. The first page, going down to section 9.04, I think most important is that we need to give our council seats a number, not to change how the election goes at large, but as a counselor, when we were strong mayor, I ran for my first office seat against a person, and it was because that's the way the ballot was set up prior to the change to the manager-council form of government. Somehow, they got dropped in the transition. But what makes the difference is you hear it in the elections now where who gets the most votes and the next one gets the most votes. But if you gave each council person, all 7, being the mayor and council seats, then you would have a person that would have to run for counselor number 1 or counselor number 2 in their name versus having 2 incumbents having to run against each other somewhat because of the most votes is one of the issues of getting reelected. So that's a suggestion I would make on section 9.04. And this is a copy, happens to be a copy of part of the charter from Haines City. I was doing some shopping and found that. On the second item, 4.05, mayor and vice mayor, currently we elect each year the vice mayor. The charter says to serve as the mayor in the absence of the mayor. This paragraph refers to the mayor and the vice mayor being appointed. I'm sorry, guys. Here's one. Excuse me. What I'm referring to here is that as the strong mayor government, such as St. Petersburg has at this time, the mayor is the CEO. Therefore, he's not part of the council. The council is required by law to account for ordinances and resolutions, anything in the way of managing the legislative part of the government. So the mayor signs off on those items now. But in this paragraph, my suggestions are is that the mayor be appointed same as the vice mayor amongst the members of council. You could put a stipulation for seniority, but I would think similar to what we do now for the vice mayor would be appropriate. The reason I say that is that the mayor is equal to all of council members. All 7 of us have 1 vote. All 7 of us are responsible to do what's best for the city and to also be accountable for that 1 vote. We've encountered some instances where, I guess in the process of just trying to get the job done or whatever the reason, decisions have been made by the mayor that should have been brought before council and be voted on. So my concern is to make that an equitable factor, and each year there's a new mayor sitting in that seat running the meetings, and therefore we have the opportunity to see a change annually if there's an overpowering function of the mayor sitting in the seat as running the meetings. But those are the 2 items that I wish to discuss. On the second page, there are some suggestions that I would ask that we consider putting into the Charter Review Commission paragraph as to appointing and implementing the Charter Review Commission. There seemed to have been some confusion this time around, and I think basically each each of the council members, again, each council member and the mayor have the same one vote. So to be fair for the council to have their charter review commission, each should be expected to appoint one person to be on the commission as you are here tonight. And then if that person should resign, then it would be up to that council member to replace that person within the 30-day period that's now listed in the charter. But those are my suggestions. I appreciate you being here, working for us. I know there's a lot to go over and a lot to look at, and I appreciate you taking the time to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you.
Any other comments from City Council? Recognizes Mr. Jim Quinn.
I too have copies of what I'm talking about. 7 copies. I'll give you mine and my concern is section 3.07, item D, page 4. Extraordinary vacancies in the event that 4 members of council are removed from office at any given time by death, disability, forfeiture of office. The governor shall appoint an interim council which shall call a special election to be held within 6 months of the occurrence of the vacancies. Such election shall be done in such a manner as to assure properly balanced future elections. If it is possible to change this section, that would end my only objection to the city charter. The main objection I have is the governor shall appoint an interim council. For as long as I've been on this council, since 2010, we in 411 cities of Florida have been fighting for home rule. So in our charter, we're telling them that the governor can appoint the replacements rather than home rule replacement. The city council, city manager, and city staff are close to the people and therefore are best qualified to find the best candidates to fill those positions. There are more than enough qualified candidates among us. And that's it. That's all I'm concerned about. It's that home rule thing. We fight for home rule against Tallahassee, and in our charter we're asking them to forget about home rule and tell us what who we need. So. Thank you, folks. That's it.
Thank you, Councilor Quinn.
If you would give that to Anne Marie for the record. And, Mr. Chairman, the only comment I would have would be to just clarify, is it your recommendation the governor would appoint any of them? Or, because you could appoint enough to have a quorum so they could appoint.
3 council members, the city manager, city staff, and the HR person, can put our heads together. We have enough people in the city that are qualified to sit on the city.
So I think
yeah, but this would be in the event that 4 members of the council are removed.
Right. Yeah.
So, okay, so you're just saying the remainder of the council and then the city manager and staff?
Well, there's 3 city council members, but if we can take suggestions from anybody else, we'll take the suggestions. But I'm saying that the city council that's remaining should be allowed to pick who's going to fill those seats.
would an alternative maybe be the governor would appoint one to bring to a quorum, and then that quorum choose the other 3?
The one is, yeah, well, okay. But if you have 4, and 2 say no and 2 say yes, you don't have a tie vote. Yeah, you gotta have 3 or 5, right? I don't know if you can make a change. I'm just making that suggestion.
Yeah, I don't know.
That if
We'd have to structure it. If they want to do that, we'd have to structure it a certain way. But
You would have to have 3.
and I'd have to check the
quorum.
statutes as well, because there are some statutory.
But you guys are gonna have to kick that around.
Right.
I just think we should be doing this.
We have some ideas maybe, but.
Yeah. Okay. Tricia, would you like to? Chair recognizes Councilor Springer.
Hi, I'm Trish Springer, 10990 Grove Terrace, Seminole, Florida. I first got elected in 2015, and when I decided to even think about running was about 1.5 years before I even thought about campaigning or picking up my packet. I have seen a lot of previous candidates in the past where they just wake up, oh, I'm going to run for city council. I take I knew this job was going to be serious. I consider it a very serious job. When we get our packets on Friday before the meeting, I will tell you, it literally takes all weekend to go page by page, punctuation, everything. That's how serious I take this job. I listened to the audio, and what concerned me was term limits. And this was a question during my first campaign during a candidates debate forum. And the reason why I still stand by it today, because I studied it, at the city level, it may take one term before you even get acclimated and get an inclination and an understanding on city government. Then you've got your second term. I'm just beginning my second term, but during my first term, the very first year, I jumped right in with the Suncoast League of Cities and the Florida League of Cities where there are committees. Right now I'm on the Transportation and Intergovernmental Relation Committee, and I take that very serious. It's more than just 2 meetings a month. It is more than just being involved at the city level. Some of us on council are more involved with the Florida League of Cities and the Suncoast League of Cities than others. And I jumped right in on it. But it may take, when you go to Tallahassee, right now the state of Florida, Tallahassee wants to take away home rule for us. Well, it may take 2 terms, 3 terms before you knock on that senator, that legislator's door before they recognize who you are, where you're from. 2 years ago, I was very instrumental on getting grants for Waterfront Park. And I spoke to Senator Brandis, and I said, $50 million. He goes, Trish, that's too much. And I said, but you'll remember me. I am the $50 million girl, and we will need to get that grant money to bring back to Seminole. So it does take more than 1 term or 2 terms before people will recognize you and where you representing our community, and not just the city of Seminole, but Pinellas County as well as throughout the state. So that's where on the local level and the city level, if you're going to impose term limits, do it more than just longer than 3 terms. A couple of other counselors have made comments that we do have term limits. Our electors vote us whether we stay in office or not. So that's the only thing I really have to give you input on it. It is a serious job, and you just don't want someone, just because they have an issue in their neighborhood, running to be in favor for that. You want people that are truly, truly involved and love their community. Mr. Couch, you served 10 years. I'm sure you can follow me on that. Mr. Bernie Jocks, I run into you everywhere. You're everywhere, and we ran into in Tallahassee. So when we are involved in these committees and we do travel, it is work. You're up at 4 in the morning to be somewhere at 6. Meetings from 8 to 5. By the time you get to the hotel room, it's 7 o'clock. It's a job. And I appreciate all of you on here because I would be scared to death if I was on the Charter Review Committee. Appreciate it. Love it. You guys are doing a wonderful, and whatever you bring back to council. We have a very good council, I believe, a very good city attorney, our new city intern, city clerk, and our city attorney and manager. Thank you very much. And you're hired. 2nd place for Jay. Thank you.
I'll let him know.
Thank you.
Any other city council comments? All right, seeing none, I'll go ahead and close that. The next item is a continued review of city charter. What I would like to do is go ahead, if it's okay with the rest of the committee. Let me amend that, and we're going to do it anyway. So let's go ahead and address what Councilor Matthews has brought up. I think we'll start there and then go into Mr. Quinn's. Yes, sir. Yeah, well, yeah, don't have to let's go, man. Thank you for asking.
Thanks, guys.
So we'll go ahead and get into that, and then we'll go into Councilor Quinn's, and then part of what we already had a discussion on was what Councilor Springer brought up. So the first thing is the assignment of seat numbers, which kind of, did everyone understand where I was going? It's essentially like almost, and it's not the same, but kind of like a district. In other words, you, instead of having at large or you're voting for the top 2, you're running against Councilor Matthews, or you're running against Councilor Springer, and instead of having it where you have 5 or 6 running and you could basically dilute the votes, you're requiring someone to pick who they're going to run against. Am I correct in that, Mr. Councilor Matthew?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
So I'd like to open it up for that and see what the thoughts are on the committee for that.
Well, okay. So if you get only 3 people that are rerunning, or let's just say you get 1 new person, so they have to pick who they're going to run against that's up for reelection, or they're anybody. They're going to say, I'm going to run against Joe Schmo, but he's still got another year to go.
Let me
Is that what
clarify
that means, Bob?
Well, let me clarify that. That's so you'll have like seat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so to speak, not counting the mayor, and that's a whole nother issue, which is essentially what Bob is saying. That's still the same. So Sharon's up for re-election. That's seat number 1. Now she may say, "I'm not running," but whoever's running is going to say, "I'm running for seat number 1."
Okay. But what if you run for seat number 1, but she still has 2 years left? No, I'm just
Every year
saying.
there's an election though, and so there's always going to be 2 seats up. If Bob has his way, it'll be 3 seats up. But every year there's 2 seats that are up. So it might be seats 3 and 5. It might
Okay,
be
so
2
you
and
can
4.
only run against the seat that's available for running against. Okay, I was lost there
Yeah,
for a minute.
that's why I wanted to clarify.
like, man, I was like, wait a minute.
I knew where he was going with it.
Okay.
And like I said, the second part of that is instead of having 2 seats open, it'd be 3 seats open. So we'll first go over to the 2 seat, assigning the seat numbers, and then having someone required to run for that seat number, whether there's an incumbent or not. That makes sense?
And for example, there's an election coming up this year, and you have Councilor Barnhorn and Councilor Quinn are up. Assume this were to have passed last year. Perhaps Barnhorn would be in seat 1, Quinn would be seat 2. And Anne Marie wanted to run. She can't run, by the way. So Anne Marie wanted to run, and she would have to decide, am I running for seat 1 or seat 2? And if there were 7 people that wanted to run, they'd have to pick. They could all 6 run against 1, and you could have no opponent. For example, Largo recently had an election where nobody ran, but it was seat 1, 2, 3, something like that was up, and nobody. I think it was the mayor and 2 were up, but the mayor would be under our current charter would be the mayor plus 6. Under one of the proposals, it would be just 7, but it would not. You would not run unless they're up. And then if there's an open seat, you would have as many people run, and then you would not probably anymore have a plurality. You would have a runoff if somebody didn't get 50% plus 1 of the vote. So whoever ran in that seat would have more than 50% of the vote from the residents. Now is top 2. And the only way you have a runoff is if there's a tie in position 2 and 3, and we talked about that at the last meeting. So, so what he's saying is that basically you'd have to pick a seat. There's 2 up every year on the council. 1 year there's 2 plus the mayor, and you would just simply have to choose how to run. The only one that is that way now is the mayor's seat because it's separate from the others. So people would have to, if you wanted to run, have to pick the seat. And the number is not districts. And I think that Mr. Matthews is very clear if you read this. It's not intended
It's just
to
a
carve the city
numbering
up.
of the chairs.
It's just the number of the chairs. In 1 year you'll have 1 and 2 up. The next year you have 3 and 4 up. And the next year you would have 5 and 6 up.
The inherent issue with that, and I think you brushed over a little bit, is if nobody runs, then what happens? But you have 4 running against on 1 seat, and you have nobody running on the other. You see what I'm saying?
One of the 4 running to the seat be real smart. They're going to change to that seat.
Could they do that?
They will.
Could they do that? Because when they qualify to vote, qualify for the election.
You have to pick a seat. That's correct. But they could change it prior to the close of the books.
Before the ballots are issued.
Well, not before the ballot, but before there's a deadline that you have to have your packets in to run. And let's say it's at noon. They would have to change the seat number if they wanted to do that.
But they would be able to do that. Okay. All right. Thoughts on that?
My first question I guess I have is, I've always been a proponent, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Right now, we have that you vote for 2 two people. There's two open spots, you vote for whoever you want to vote for. You choose two. Do we chance the possibility that if, you know, maybe this person gets more votes than somebody in another seat, like, for example, everybody, you know, votes for seat 1 because they know somebody that's the one they want, and not as many vote for the other seat, and that person gets reelected just because all the votes went somewhere else. I don't know, I guess I just feel like the top 2 pretty much covers it. Because you could have somebody get less votes and still get reelected just because they didn't have anybody running against them. I know I'm not explaining this quite right,
I know what
but
you're saying. We know what you're saying. Any other thoughts? I get what you're saying.
I guess the way I was explaining it is, let's say you have 2 people who would be excellent counselors, and they both choose to run for the same seat, and they each get 1,000 votes each. And another counselor only gets 600, but because the person running against them only had 300, they get reelected. Even though there's another person in that same race who had more votes, they get reelected based on the fact who was running against them.
But just to clarify, if you did have 2 seats, you would vote, you would vote on both seats.
Right.
You would have a choice to vote on both seats.
Okay, so
One person would have 2 votes.
Yeah, and that's not, I mean, I get the concern, but it's not different from any election. I mean, voters sometimes skip one seat and then they vote for one, and some people get elected with less numbers than other people. And so that's not my major concern, because I think that's universal in any ballot. Like if you have a, you know, even
it'd be like running for treasury or vice president or something like that. You'd pick a seat you want to run for.
right, yeah.
That's correct. Like governor
exactly.
or, you know, secretary of state or whatever. Of course, those are
Right.
you know, different things.
Exactly.
So, just
So,
say,
yeah.
okay, the top ones will give you governor, this blah, blah, blah. It doesn't.
Yeah, there's some
Okay,
people
so
who
you're
vote for
running
AG
for a specific.
and skip Commission of Agriculture, and the Commission of Agriculture gets elected with less votes.
Right.
You know, and they're all on the same cabinet. So, I mean, I don't think that's the major concern. My thing is, but to your point, if it's not broke, don't fix it. What is the current issue with
Yeah,
the current
that's what I'm-
system? You know, and
Can
what's-
Bob tell me? I don't understand. Can you help me understand?
As I explained, when I ran first time for office in 1990, I ran against a specific individual who was up for re-election. At that time, there was 2 people each term elected as they are now. I beat him, and the other person was incumbent, and he didn't have any competition. He didn't even have to run a campaign. The situation we have now, and I call it a situation because we've got, go back to Tom Christie. Tom Christie ran 9 times. Just for one example of clarity, of his goal was to get more votes than one of the incumbents. But because of us being the way we are, the most votes twice, first 2 top vote getters get the seats. It causes those who hold a seat to run against each other in order to get that vote more than that third person that Jeff stepped in. That person wants one of those seats. He basically gets the choice of 2 seats to pick from, depending upon how the numbers fall out. Whereas he should only be running for 1 seat. Like she says, running for the governor. If there's 2 persons running for the governor's seat, you're going to have those who fall out that aren't going to get the maximum votes, but the maximum votes. And in reference to Trish's, the one with the low vote, if they have no competition, their vote themselves, 1 vote, gives them a re-elected seat into that position without having to campaign. They just get re-elected because no one ran against them.
So if you have 1 person running against seat number 1, let's just say, and 2 running against seat number 2, is that what you're saying? It makes it clarify that the 2 running against seat number 2, the higher one will win?
The higher one will win. of the three, the incumbent plus the two, the higher number of those three, the two new ones running against that incumbent.
Okay, I get it. Okay, so you got the incumbent in seat 2, and you got 2 running against that
Right.
person. Okay. Versus whoever gets the most votes, 1, 2, and 3.
And the other benefit that go in this direction is if you have 5 or 6 running for a seat on council, they can diffuse the numbers such that a little bit can get you a long ways in the election as far as number counts. Because if we divide the numbers out 5 or 6 different ways, and we've had 6 run for office, then you're playing with a closer number between the incumbents. It works the way it is, but the way it was before, I ran against a person, and now if I wanted to run for office, I'd run against 2 persons, because 2 run each year.
Well, I guess that makes sense.
And one of them's going to lose if I get more numbers than they do, but if I run, if each seat has a number, then I have to pick which one, and then I'm running against that person that incumbent's numbers instead of whatever I can get.
I mean, that makes more sense. You're running against 2 people instead of 1. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Bob.
All right. Any other thoughts on that?
That makes sense to me as far as running against 1 person versus running against, if there's 3 people and there's 2 seats open, you're running against 2 people as the third wheel, basically.
I think that's kind of the point, the opposite of the point I was making is, if there's 2 seats open and you have, let's say, 3 people running, you have 3 people, if 2 of those people run against each other and each of them gets, 1,000 votes, 1,100 votes, the person who's not running against those 2 gets 500 votes. Have we served the voters if the majority of the voters wanted those 2 people? One got 1,000, one got 1,100, this person got 500. Obviously, more voters wanted these people in office than the other person.
It's feasible and it's possible, but it's probably mathematically unlikely, since you'll be able to vote for, the one person will be able to get 2 votes. So it's more than likely going to be that the top vote getters for each one of those seats.
But if they're running against each other,
Right.
if they're running for the same seat, that's where you're.
And if I may, Trish, although by sheer numbers, a contested seat may have, the second place person may have more votes than the person who's uncontested, it's not necessarily a declaration by the voters that we prefer these top 2 people. There's probably more votes because it's contested and it's more, it garnered more interest, but it doesn't mean that the person who lost in seat 1 was preferred over the person in seat 2 who was uncontested or had a weaker challenger. I think they're voting in silos in that situation. And so that wouldn't be my big concern as to, the voters are being disenfranchised. They're picking the best 2. I think each race garners its own interests. And if there's 2 people running against each other versus 1 not running against no one, I can see why even the loser, the person that contested, would get more votes if that's one, it's contested and the other one isn't. My whole thing is, it seems to be, I see how it creates an awkward situation between incumbents running against incumbents and colleagues running against colleagues, but I don't see, as a voter in the city of Seminole, to me, it's a very neat way to do elections. I've never, voted in a different format in any other race, but I think it's worked, and it seems like even that concern, it seems to me, since I've been voting in the city of Seminole, the incumbents have been getting elected even in the current format. And to me, I think top 2 vote getters, it's fine, and it's work.
I kind of agree with that. It makes sense.
I never thought about it as, in the last election, Trish and Chris Burke were running, I believe. And I never thought of it as them running against each other. I just thought, oh, those are the 2 counselors. I happen to know those counselors, and they're both running for their seat again, or running for a seat again. Never thought about it as them running against each other, so I never saw it that way. Because that's why it doesn't pose a problem for me. I like the system that.
Well, Sounds like the consensus is to leave it alone. Is that where we're at with it? Well, let's move on to the mayoral, which is even, I dare say, more interesting topic. And that is Councilor Matthews is recommending, at least for us to consider, having the mayor not run as a separate entity, but to run as a council, and then have the council, as they do with the vice mayor, be chosen to run the meetings and be the face of the government, so to speak. So, thoughts on that?
Well, I think I brought this up already, as far as having the mayor just be a council person and then picking every year they rotate, you know? So,
Yeah, I think that fits.
Oh, the mayor. Right now, the vice mayor is rotated based on the will of the city council, along with the mayor, and that is selected on an annual basis. What Councilor Matthews is recommending is that the mayor be chosen in the same fashion. That the council will then nominate and select that mayor to run the be the mayor for that upcoming year. And then the next year either retain that individual or select another person. With that, though, comes a higher pay for that year, approximately like $4,000 or $5,000 more than the average city council makes. But just other than that, there's more meetings
And this was something that y'all discussed at the last meeting, and I believe there was a consensus not to make a change to the charter.
Correct. That was correct.
Okay. 0 for 2, Bob. Sorry. Trying.
Sorry, Bob.
I'm trying, Bob. I really am. Okay. Next, and we'll go to Councilor Quinn's. I'm more, in my personal opinion, is. Oh, did you?
Well, was this also part of?
I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. You're right. What's Bob saying here?
The process for.
Oh yeah. We covered this, though, did we not?
We did go
Just like
over
we
it.
did
I
the-
sent, I drafted a memo, and there was some information in it with regards to, there were 2 sections to which this committee recommended that by putting a verbiage in there to say the council shall adopt by resolution prior to appointing members to the commission or prior to, I believe it was filling a vacancy. They were separate and apart. One was, there was a statutory requirement that says it has to be by ordinance or charter provision to lay out the procedure. So I don't recommend the resolution wording be put in there, but it's up to the will of the commission what you want to recommend. As for the Charter Review Commission, we can continue that, but it's up to the commission whether or not you want to make those 2 sections uniform by laying out the procedures, or whether you want to give I guess the issue is giving the council direction as to what that procedure is going to be. Do you want them to come up with it on their own? Just they have to do it beforehand and contingencies upon contingencies? Or do you want to recommend to them what the procedure should be and embed that in the charter for all councils to come until such time as the charter is changed, should it be adopted by the electorate?
Erica, your memo talked about 2 things.
Correct.
And I think that they're
separate
very different.
and apart.
2 different ways.
One
yeah.
of the things is replacing a vacant council seat. The other
Correct.
is the appointment of the charter review.
Correct, but
So-
and I broke them out because the
Right.
recommendation was the same, which was to put a wording in there that there needs to be a resolution adopted by the council prior to doing that. So, the
That's
only,
for charter review committee.
actually, I have notes that on
by
both.
city
Right, you're
council.
saying that for the city council, you couldn't do that.
Right, for the city council, you cannot do that. For charter review committee, you can put that resolution wording in there. My only question to you is, do you want to continue with that, or do you want to lay out a procedure to recommend to the council if it were adopted by the electorate to have in there? I've confused myself. Okay. Do you want to have, basically you're making a recommendation to the council that says, hey, we want you guys to adopt by resolution prior to appointing anyone to this committee, a procedure to follow to the T before you ever appoint anyone. That was A. That's what was discussed at the last meeting. Or the other option is you can say, this is what we want the procedure to be.
Right.
We would like you to embed this in the charter for all councils to come should the electorate adopt this charter amendment, that you don't get to change by resolution every year prior to, or every so often the method by which you appoint people to this committee, it's always going to be appointed in this manner. So you kind of have two options there.
Right. Personally, I like setting the rules, because I think if you get a council that like to sway one way or the other, and they say, okay, we can outvote an agreement, I want to do it this way, and let's just say 4 out of the 7 want it done a certain way that gives more power to their selection committee, the way they want the charter review to be selected or voted or whatever, like the cluster that it was the last time, versus the way each one has been doing it for a long time, is that each council person picks one person from the town that they want to represent in the charter review. And that's for people that they know, that they like, that basically has the interest more so, I think, of that committee, the council person. So you have an array of people being chosen by appointment, not by vote, but by appointment, like it's been done for a long time. So then this way, if let's just say you have a council that leans to, well, we want things to remain the same even though this thing could be completely broken, so they'll be able to outvote their other council members in how they want to decide how the charter review committee is chosen. And then if they put in place how they want it chosen, then it's almost like they might be setting it up to kind of heavily stack the charter review committee for their own agenda. So I think if you have every one person is picking one person to come in and do this, then, and not by vote, I'm not voting to say that, you know, she can't pick that person. I don't like the person. No, we can't pick that person. No, everybody picks a person. You don't have to like them, you just pick them. And then if that person can serve, then that person picks another person, because it represents their seat of sorts. And I think it kind of evens everything out for one lean or the other, personally.
So I think the issue too is going to be something that's more rigid and something that's more flexible.
Yeah.
So if you place the procedure within the charter, that's going to be rigid and from here until it changes in the future.
Mm-hmm.
If you say the resolution, that's something that's more flexible, that if this system doesn't work, the next council that has to appoint to the committee can say, okay, we're going to lay out this procedure, that procedure didn't work, maybe this procedure will work a little bit better. But either way, they do it prior to whoever gets appointed to the committee. So it's up to you how you guys want to structure that, but one is going to be providing more flexibility and one is going to be a more rigid procedure that y'all will have to kind of spell out in the charter.
Are you basically saying that the council, like when it comes up again, that the council, before that even takes place, they'll decide amongst themselves how they want to do it?
Correct.
That's one of
Okay,
the
well, that
That's
makes
one option.
sense. That makes sense.
That's via resolution. The other is to make it, as the city attorney said, would make it more rigid and put it actually in the charter itself to say this is the way they have to do it. So those are the two choices essentially.
I'd like to say something. I might have misunderstood, so please correct me if I'm wrong. I thought there was a procedure that each of the counselors suggested somebody, and they had a backup person ready to go. What I understood happened, or may have happened, is that there was a deadline that you were supposed to have those names in, and the names weren't provided, and that's what caused a little bit of a problem. But that's a procedure to me. You know, if you have to have the names and you're turning them in by a certain point, it sounds like there was a rigid procedure already in place.
Well, yeah, but it wasn't written down, okay? It was what they had done for a long time. Each council person selected who they wanted to be on the review committee. What happened was there was a vote. Well, we're going to vote for these people, and 2 people on the council said, I have a problem with 2 of these people, or a few. So one guy stepped out because he thought they were talking about him. And then an alternate was supposed to have been chosen, but it was chosen from a pool of alternates, which then if you have, let's just say 4 people said, okay, I got 2, I got 1 and an alternate, but the other 3 only has 1. then their alternates are chosen from somebody who already had, let's just say that person still has, let's just say me. I put somebody there and had an alternate. Your guy backed out, but you didn't choose an alternate. So now you're going to pick from my alternate that you don't like. See?
Well, if you go into it, if you're supposed to pick 2 people by a certain deadline, then you always have the alternate.
Right.
So follow the procedure.
Right, but they're not choosing from your alternate. But let's just say you only had one, okay?
But you needed 2.
Well, it wasn't clear. You didn't have to have 2. You could have 2.
Well, it's probably smart to have 2.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's not written down. So if you say, okay, you have to pick one and an alternate, even if your one is a surefire horse going to win the race, okay?
Yeah.
But that means that yours alternate has to come from your pick of alternates, not from a pool of alternates that maybe there's somebody backed out and they said, now I'm not going to do it. And then the next thing you know, then you have a leaning charter review committee versus each person selected by that council person is like, okay, yes, I know I was selected by so-and-so and we talk, we are the same mind for mostly. And then that's how you get basically a variety of ideas that's not all one leaning that says, wait a minute, how did they pick all that crap? Okay, so this way everybody's represented and not from just a pool of extras that are mostly from everybody else but not from you. Okay, so I don't know what happened with that other alternate, so that I wasn't well versed on.
I think that's what I would want to know is, at what point did the council decide this is the way we are going to do it? And I would think that all council members would have been aware that it's going to be, you choose a person and an alternate. Was that not discussed?
I don't
Bob,
It was discussed.
Bob would know.
Bob can probably shed more
but
light.
I will say this, is that either one of the options you're talking about requires writing down what the process would be prior to the selection.
Correct, because it's not written down.
Right.
It was how it's been done for a
all
long
verbal
time.
At the dais.
Right.
And it was a consensus to
So
do
everybody
that.
agreed
It was
to
a
do it that
consensus to
way.
do that.
Right, but then they were going to vote on them, and that's never been a part of it. They've just appointed. They've basically said, okay, we're in consensus that these are our charter review people. Not that I don't like the one you picked. I don't like the one you picked. I want more of the ones I like. It doesn't work that way. It shouldn't work that way. Everybody should have a voice.
Which could be
Yeah, it
resolved
seems like
via,
everyone should be able to pick their own without any.
Correct. That's
And if
what
that
that's what
person-
that's what
So-
I was suggesting
And if that
before.
person doesn't want to do it, then they should take that their counselor's second choice.
I would think, yeah, let's just say if I get picked and I say, yeah, I really want to do it, well, they're not going to pick me, because hopefully they would have discussed it before they threw my name in the hat, and then they would have to pick 2, the front runner and then the second one, that just in case something happened, this person couldn't do it but did want to do it, then number 2 could step into
And they
place.
need
And I
a
think that's a
deadline,
good
a
idea.
deadline
So
for that.
Correct.
I think it should be laid out. I mean,
Right.
maybe it should be rigid, so there's
I
no
think it
confusion.
should, well, because I
Okay,
think
so then there's 2 things. One, we're talking about a past appointment that didn't have any type of written procedure tied to it. So moving forward, you're still given the 2 options. You can either require within the charter provision that the council, prior to appointing anyone, come to an agreement and draft a resolution that has a procedure laid out that they have to follow, whatever that procedure is. Could be this same procedure that you guys have discussed, could be a different procedure where they pick names out of a hat, I mean, whatever they choose. But they have to have a resolution prior to any appointments that they are going to follow. But they are responsible for choosing what that procedure looks like. Or the other option is you guys can determine what you want the procedure to be,
like that part.
draft that as part of a charter revision, and then put that forth to the council to see if that's something that they would like to adopt and put out to the electorate.
I like that one.
Just one thing I would remind you, this is what the charter currently says, and this is what you're discussing. The only guidance the charter gives you is every effort shall be made to appoint 1 member who has served during the previous charter review committee. And there was an effort by the council they asked at least 2 people from the previous charter to serve, and they weren't able to. The city attorney ruled that was a sufficient effort. And it simply says the member shall be appointed by the city council, and that any vacancy shall be filled in 30 days in the same manner. So that's the only
That's
guidance
an
that's in the
appointment,
charter
right,
now.
and not a vote. It's not, you know, I'm gonna recommend that we use this person, and then everybody votes and say, nah, we don't like that
But it is
person.
however they do it. It just says the council shall appoint, which means the body as a whole. So right now, there's really no guidance to the council specifically how it is to be done. That is, it just, and so that every time before they do it, they have to decide
me,
that.
it makes it's two different words.
Well, appointments are not always self-executing. I mean, appointments a lot of times go through a vote after the person's appointed, just like the developmental review board that I'm on, I was appointed to serve on it, but everybody gets to vote on it, just as if the governor appoints or a president appoints somebody. They go through a confirmation process and there's a vote. So the two are not mutually exclusive. But what you're saying, you want it to be self-executing where no vote occurs? Somebody just
Because
appoints
that's
and
how I
no.
always understood it was before, that everybody would just appoint one and it was just say, okay, fine, we're all in consensus, this is our charter review committee, and move on. I never saw where there was.
The only issue that lies there, and I want to have Bob add some color to this, is if someone on council, I'm not saying they would do this, picks someone so unsavory and so unpalatable, and there's not a voice from the rest of the council to go, wait a minute, you're doing this to sabotage or create problems for whatever reason, then, and I can think of a name and I'm not going to,
Okay.
but if you did that, then you say, you know what, you guys are ticking me off so bad, I'm gonna put someone on there just so unsavory and just sabotage the whole process. And I think that's wherein lies, you have a little bit more of the democracies, and like Mr. Jackson was saying, like, we should, I think, have a little bit of a voice. And I get what you're saying, it's like, hey, look, this is who I'm getting. You may not like him or her, but that's who you're getting. And it may be someone that is, like, really bad. But if I could, Bob, do you have
That council
something?
person needs to go if that's who their pick is,
That's
right?
when the election comes up. Bob, did you have something you wanted to add on that?
Yes, I do. The meeting for which the discussion was to pick a second person, I was missing. I was at county for a land development meeting and never saw anything in writing, and the city manager informed me that I needed to pick a second one in order to meet the request of council. My comment to her was, I don't need to pick a second one. The one I picked is going to serve and going to do a good job. And I don't want to embarrass the person that I picked by picking somebody else. That was the discussion. And I was of the understanding verbally that the second person picked was going to be the replacement. I got chastised for not picking a second person by the chair and others on council. I didn't need the second person. I've never picked the second person. In the past, you pick, and I've served on more than, or been here for more than one of them, you pick a person, as Ann Peachy is mentioning here, and that person serves. What troubled me about the way we went is that our responsibility is to create the board, as you are, and the rest of it's on you. The only requirement that's in the charter is that they must be a resident of the city. That requirement's being met, or else they wouldn't have been voted in initially. So the fact that we picked someone else and left Roger Edelman without a choice, and he didn't delay in doing that. We voted on this on the 12th of February, and then on the 16th, the chamber had a dinner, and at that point we were informed that Bob Castles had resigned. He served on 2 previous council charter reviews. But what troubled me was that we voted for the replacement, and then he came the next meeting with the next name. There was no delay in bringing the name, and there was a big discussion about, well, you should have picked somebody. He and I did not pick because we didn't have a need to pick. The other part that troubled me is that when the comments were made after we got into discussion, well, I'm not really happy with that person. How many of us have anyone on council or in the community that agree on everything? The man that resigned had resigned because he didn't want to cause a rift in the unit, and his replacement didn't come from Roger, it came from another council member. And it was all politics. It wasn't for the benefit of this charter review, and each of you will do a good job, and the person that replaced will do a good job. It's the way it was done that really upset me, because nobody was listening to me, who've sat through 3 of them, and we never done it this way. Why are we doing this? And I got beat up because I didn't appoint the second one, but nothing was in writing. We didn't agree on anything. If we're going to go to the resolution, we should do it up front. But if we look at the charter and put the word shall in there instead of can, we can control it the way it should be, where each council member appoints somebody and we get on with the job. So,
yeah, so it really comes down to 2 choices. Thank you, Councilor Matthews. And I'm more inclined to have it as a resolution requirement, just because I'd like for it to be a little more flexible based on the current environment at that time, because we're not sure what it's going to look like. That's my inclination, just my years on council. I know things get a little fluid at times as it relates to selecting people for boards and committees, but I do think the rigidness would come from requiring a resolution prior to the selection, which means they have to come up with an actual standard procedure to select the charter review committee members and thereby follow those. To Bob's point, like, well, I was told to come up with, a person. I came up with a person, and then they said, well, now I got to come up with someone else. But there's a kind of a arbitrary deadline, and I didn't know, who I was supposed to get. So I think that would be my recommendation. And but I'd like to see if we have a consensus either on that or some other thoughts.
That was pretty much my point, was that having followed this whole thing, I think while they discussed a process, it wasn't anything firm, it wasn't in writing, they didn't plan on certain contingencies, like somebody deciding not to serve. I think if all of that had been planned out ahead of time, it would have been better. Mm-hmm. And even though they thought they had a process that worked, obviously, there was issues with it. So I think the chance of us as a group coming up with a policy, firm policy now, that is going to work from now until eternity, is not going to happen. So I think it is something that we need to make sure that they set it in policy prior to, electing anybody for charter review or nominating, and that way they can change it as needed based on the current politics of the, what's going on. Maybe they decide later they want 2 people have served before or something, some change that need to be made. But I think it's definitely something I would rather have the council do it prior to, but again, a strict policy, deadlines, contingencies, etc. Not just, hey, let's do it this way.
I agree, and also to John's point, maybe, as you mentioned, what if it's someone that, enough people think is horrible? Maybe there should be a final vote by the council of all the charter review committee that you approve everyone.
And I think that would be part of the resolution. I think that's kind of happening now anyway. So are we in agreement on that? Is any dissenting opinions?
So do you...
Resolution.
Right, okay. So by resolution, do you want to have anything within that resolution, requirements within the resolution, or just by resolution the council should determine a procedure?
Set procedure that has to be followed. I don't think we should tell them how to do the governing portion of their business.
Right, so you don't want to say you need to include deadlines or contingencies?
I think they just need...
Prior to the
appointment.
Prior to the appointment, they have to have a set procedure.
In writing.
The meeting?
In writing,
So
yes.
the meeting prior to...
Yes.
Yeah.
The meeting prior
No
to...
later.
No later than... That sounds
We
good.
start getting down this rabbit hole of, like, you got to pick this person or that person. Good Lord, I'll be on here for 20 years. We don't want that. Okay. No. All right. Thank you for pointing that out there. I missed that part.
Yeah.
All right. So the next part was Councilor Quinn's and Councilor Springer's. We're going to get into another business because that was something we were already discussing before. My opinion on that, for what it's worth, is exactly the way it's, I think we need to personally leave it the way it is. The likelihood of losing 4 council members essentially in one specified time period is unlikely, but I think our governor can select those people and then wait for the next election and then go from there. But I'd like to hear any either dissenting or other opinions as well.
Maybe the council, if that should happen, the remaining members or who else might be appointed, maybe find some people they feel would be qualified and maybe present those names to the governor, since, like he said, the people here know more about those people than maybe the governor would. Present the names to the governor and then...
Well, I know in a couple of times when I have seen that the governor has been put in this position where colleagues of mine have operated, it's typically not the governor, but his staff assigned to that will reach out to the leadership in the community, be it a county commissioner, a city, the city council, et cetera, to get a feel for perhaps a representative of the county upon the passing of County Commissioner Maroney. The governor appointed J.J. Baruti, and I think that was extremely seamless. But he did vet that process. He knew that Mr. Baruti was very much a part, and they have to otherwise meet all the requirements of the charter. They'd have to be a resident, and in Mr. Baruti's case, he had to live in a certain area, et cetera. So just my experience in my career of various times where the governors had to make that appointment, there normally is consideration given. Now, it's not required, but typically the governor does give consideration and talks to some of the leadership in the community before making that appointment.
I think that process is already essentially, what you were saying is essentially in place, because I know the governor or his staff would be getting with the city manager and also other council members in the community. Who's out there that would be good, because he or she wouldn't know anyone.
Typically a lot of weight's given to the elected officials. I would doubt I would even get the call. It would probably be just the elected officials. And the party leadership, if the governor is it's going to be one party or the other, if there is leadership in this area from that party, typically they also talk to party leadership. That's just how it happens.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
I'm still learning.
Yeah. But,
you're doing great.
But I'm not sure that they have a resolution setting out the process, but it's just that's kind of how they have done it.
Okay.
So, Mr. Quinn's concern would be going to the state versus having it done here locally. Is that right? Is that?
Yeah, he's concerned about.
I mean, that's a big thing for people. I mean, they'd have to be on a bus together, and it goes over a hill or something. I mean, I think that would be unlikely.
It's feasible, unlikely, but that's his contention is that he would rather the local community, more specifically the city council, which is not possible if you have less than a quorum. And then the other thought was, what if we have the governor just pick one? And I think we're kind of splitting hairs at that point. So my thought is, and I know what you're saying, but that's where the governor and his staff would be able to interact with our local community to say who's the best pick. And this is a nonpartisan board or council, so the party would probably not have a whole lot of impact.
And they have to call a special election within 6 months anyway.
So it's kind of a quick thing.
It'll get filled soon.
So, okay, we good, or do we want to have something else?
And the main reason for that I will share is so the city can pay its bills, do purchase orders, et cetera, things like that in that interim time. Because if you have an election within 6 months, then it would be the next election. And if you don't, you'll have to have one within 6 months.
Right. Any other thoughts on that?
Wow.
We'll leave as is. Moving along, everyone was provided the city attorney's revisions. Are there any thoughts, questions, problems, concerns? We already went through these page by page on last meeting, but it would be incumbent upon us to make sure that those changes are what we were recommending.
I have a question. On 10.03, I think that was the one where I was saying that I think it was changed to the members shall be residents, because I was saying it, the way it was worded before is the person could have at any time in the past been a resident. But did we lose the part that there will be a resident of at least 1 year?
Yeah, it's
I
in
think that
here.
was in
Where did I
there.
see this? It was,
Are you looking under
301,
10.03 or
3.01.
3.01?
It's right
Okay,
there
I
in
was
the
looking at the
beginning.
charter review.
Okay.
Okay. I'm looking at the charter
Wrong
review part.
section. On the front.
At least a one-year period
Right. Must
immediately
retain their
prior
residency
to
within the
qualifying.
blah, 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 during the term.
They must
And then
keep
their
it during
seat
the
will
term.
be immediately forfeited. Okay, that one was fixed for that one.
Madam City Attorney, did you want to, I guess if you wanted to go through and just say what you made the changes on?
Sure, I can, yeah, I can
highlight.
highlight kind of where I made the changes
That
and
might be
then
better.
some of the questions I had on direction on what you'd like further. So section 3.01, I made the change to the residency requirement being the year immediately preceding the qualifying for candidacy. And then maintaining residency throughout. The next change I made was 3.05. To coincide with the other provision with electing the vice chair at the second business meeting in November instead of the one right after the election to give a little bit more time. I made the Scrivener's error in section 3.07C under subsection 1 to say temporarily filled within 60 days as that was not
And
there.
does that have to be a charter amendment? You were gonna say.
No, that's just a Scrivener's error, but it was a change that I made. So, no, that doesn't need to be put to the electorate. And I,
3.8, you changed council, took
yeah, I
council
took out city council, so it just has the city manager. I did not make any changes to sections 8.03 or 8.04, and I detailed in the memo as to why I didn't believe those needed to be changed, unless you'd like any type of clarifying language within those. I think each section speaks specifically to a different branch of the government or a different procedure in which an emergency, either an ordinance or an executive order, can be put forth. And I can answer any questions on that.
Any questions or thoughts on those?
And I will tell you that this has been used because during Irma, we did use this section. And from a staff perspective, we didn't have any problems with it.
So then the only direction based on our conversation from the last meeting that I would need for the direction, and I've already got it on the Charter Review Commission, to add the verbiage with regard to setting the council must set a resolution with a concrete procedure prior to the meeting where they will make the appointments for the Charter Review Commission. However, that same provision I would not suggest doing for filling the vacancy of a council seat. I think that procedure, it either needs to be set forth in the charter or it needs to be done via ordinance through the council. So this committee can either come to the conclusion that you want to set forth that procedure or that you'd like to make the recommendation that council adopt an ordinance setting forth that procedure. Or you can say that the procedure that's set out procedure is fine, and that would be how you fill vacancy.
The looseness of the procedure, because there really isn't one. So I think, again, I'm more inclined to have it as set by the city council by ordinance, as opposed to going into a charter, but I'd like some thoughts and any opinions there as well. Oh, I'm sorry.
I agree.
Bernie was covering you up. I'm sorry. Bernie, don't do that again. Come on.
I just agree with what you're saying. I think it should be something that the council decides.
Okay.
I agree.
All right. And that's,
So then
we'll recommend an ordinance by
make
city
a
council.
recommendation that
And
it be done via
it's the
ordinance.
same argument as the other where I said, the selection of the charter review. Things have a tendency to change. And if we set it that it has to be the next person in line, then I think I've said that multiple times. You might get someone that you really don't want on council. I assure you. So that's good. Thank you for that. All right. So, Madam City Attorney, any other thoughts on those?
Not on what we discussed at the last meeting.
Do you have any other? Because now we're on to other business. Well, let me clarify. Do we have anything else on the city charter that we've reviewed? Because I don't want to move on.
No.
Okay. Now.
So as a pertains to my memo. If there's any questions, I can answer them. Otherwise, I'm just looking for more direction from this committee as to how we should proceed. If there's no more topics to discuss.
That was an easy way out. I thought you had more to discuss. Like, oh, I'm just waiting for you.
It is not my job to suggest changes to the charter.
Oh, here we go.
Unless there's something
Unless it's correct, but there isn't, so know your role.
All right, so the other business that we had, and I'll open it up to you all, other business, because I don't want to direct that, so. We do have other business, but I'll let someone else bring it up.
Yes, the other business is what we agreed we'd take up at the last meeting, the issue of the term limits. And where we left off last meeting is, we would table it, do some further research. I believe, Trish, you had some ideas, some concerns, the validity, and you wanted some time for reflection. I think arguments were made by several people here, and so just wanted to see if we can proceed and if things have been cleared up, if further research has been done. I know I've been talking to voters about it, but.
Well, just, I'm personally not, believe me, I've, as I said, when I saw the commercial in the last election and, they were touting how this particular person had been there for 50 years. And I thought, wow, that's like, that's a lifetime. So I've always been, like, somewhat opposed to term limits because I mean, for people staying forever. So I guess I would be in favor of term limits. Yeah. However, when I actually started researching it, what I found was, and the things that concerned me the most about imposing term limits, is if I think Councilor Matthews is doing a wonderful job and he's under term limits, then I can't vote for him in the next election because he's forced out. And if he has to sit out for a year and something happens in the next election, I can't say, let's get Bob. Because, like, he's perfect. He knows what's going on. He's been here. To me, I'm limiting my vote. I'm limiting the votes of the people. The other thing is just the learning curve. I mean, with any job, there's a learning curve. And, I think Councilor Springer was talking about it earlier with, talking to politicians. And sometimes it takes years to develop that, that relationship with them. And if you have somebody, if somebody's changing out, then you've just lost all of those relationships. You've lost, yes, they may know the city, but they don't know that counselor. You may have somebody who says, hey, I think I'll run for council. And she mentioned it as well. Maybe they're not serious about it. My husband ran twice. And I said, well, you're going to run again, right? And he's like, nope, don't want to do it anymore. I've got other things going on. And I think, what if he had gotten on council? I mean, he would have been the perfect example of not, he couldn't have committed the way that I've seen these counselors commit. Every time I come to a meeting and I hear the counselor reports of all the trainings they've gone to, all the meetings they've gone to. They rushed back from Tallahassee the other day. I mean, I'm sorry, but, what they do is well beyond the scope of what I ever knew. And to think of somebody coming in new and having to learn all of that stuff, not just especially if they've never had any type of political experience. I think you mentioned earlier, we don't want somebody who's running just because they're upset about an issue or something. They're here for the wrong reason. I want somebody who's here, who wants to be here, and I don't want to force them out just because they've been here too long. And then, of course, you also run into the other thing. If I've got a counselor who's going to be forced out and they're not happy about it, they're just going to throw a wrench into everything. Well, no, I don't want to vote for that. No, I don't think we should do that. Just, it could go rogue. You never know. But I know that's kind of a stretch. But again, I think if it's working,
So, since I'm on the other side of this opinion, I'd love to address some of your points. Regarding the first point, it limits your vote if you think a certain counselor is doing a great job. You can't reward them with another term. But that's currently the reality for a lot of offices you vote for, whether it be for the President of the United States, whether it be for governor, whether it be for your state legislators, state senators, state representative. That is the case. You're going to love a certain state representative. You're going to love a certain president, and you're not going to be able to extend their term. And so this is not a foreign concept. It's just simply whether or not we would allow the voters to choose whether or not this is something they want to implement at the local level, as they already have at the state level, at all levels of the state, whether it be the cabinet, the governor, and their legislature, or how they operate with their president. So, it's a reality, but it's not something that's foreign to the voters have to decide every election anyways. Regarding the learning curve, this could be addressed, and Councilor Springer alluded to it about, if you're going to consider term limits, about the amount of terms that would allow somebody to hit the ground running, and so there may be validity to extending to having a good amount of terms, whether it be 3 or 4, more than 2, that would give that person the time to get that learning curve and be able to be effective, down the stretch. One of the points that she made, and again, this is not an attack on anyone. I'm a big fan of Councilor Springer, and she appointed me. I'm a friend of hers. She was a big supporter of mine in other efforts. So what I will say, her point was the amount of years that it will take for her to work with the legislature on a particular issue, and how the amount of terms may not, if this term limited, may not give her the opportunity to shepherd everything through. One example that can address this is if the term limits were 3 terms, which would be a total of 9 years, she would actually outlast potentially a state representative or a state senator who their terms is 8 years. And so that legislator that she would be lobbying, potentially, if they're not elected to another chamber, could be gone. And so, it's actually the reverse. It could be the reverse situation where she's a run and they're not, depending on the limits that we provide. So I don't think that should weigh too much, because of the reality of the matter that there are term limits with those individuals that she would be lobbying, for lack of better terms. Regarding, somebody running because they're upset about a certain issue, I think that's very American. If somebody is upset about a certain issue, they have every right to run, and they will be vetted by the voters, and if the voters believe in the particular issue that prompted them to run, the voters will make that decision. And so I don't think it's, and I know nobody means it disrespectfully, but if a fellow citizen has a gripe and they think the way they can make a change is by putting their name in the hat, to be considered by their fellow residents, there's nothing improper about that. And so, I don't think it should be discouraged. And I think we want more civic participation for whatever reason, and the voters will vet it out. And so I'm not persuaded by that. So I just think, like I said at the last meeting, that at the end of the day, we can argue the merits of term limits, but what we're deciding is whether or not the people of the city of Seminole should have the decision to choose whether or not they want the term limits. We won't be the final say-so. It's actually going to go to the city council. They will have a say-so. And if they approve it themselves, the voters will decide whether or not they believe they should have term limits. And so, and I don't think that's a radical thing, because there's already term limits at all levels of government, and we're just empowering voters to decide whether or not they believe that the current system is correct, and whether or not they believe there should be term limits. And I will say, I've been making phone calls to citizens here in the city just to kind of gauge their interest on this matter, because it was brought to being, unsolicited. I didn't ask specifically for term limits. I asked, what are some of the issues that you would like to see in the city charter? And a couple of voters brought up, term limits. And so I was specifically calling voters the past few days, and I will tell you that of those who had an opinion, the answer was resoundingly yes. There was one no, and several were undecided on the matter and made some of the points that you made and said, well, I can see why it would benefit us to not have term limits, and why, and they went back and forth. They were undecided on the matter. But of those who had a solid opinion, it's pretty decently yes. And so, it's not the biggest of sample sizes, but it shows that it's worth having the conversation, and it would be duked out in the court of public opinion, and through an election process, people can advocate one way or another, and the voters will make the final decision as to whether or not they want the term limit. So that's a decision. I think, when it's all said and done.
But don't they technically have term limits now? Because if the voters think somebody's been in office too long, they don't vote for them. They vote them out.
Correctly. So they will decide that. They will decide whether they believe that. So currently, that's the current state of the matter. And I don't think there's ever been, I'm not a historian of the city of Seminole. I don't know if they've ever been presented with that issue, but the thing they'll be decided to vote on is whether or not they believe what you just said. If they believe that, yeah, I currently have an opportunity for term limits, I just vote them out, then they'll vote no. But if they believe we want extra restrictions, I want it built into the charter, then they will vote yes. And that's what we're just offering them a choice as to whether or not they believe what you're saying, and probably a lot will, or if they want it to be enshrined that somebody would be limited.
But with the system we have now, if somebody's been in office too long, according to the voters, they can be voted out. But if you install term limits, somebody who the voters don't want out could be forced to leave.
I understand, but the point is the voters will decide that. So, I mean, our decision is whether or not you're going to get a
They won't excuse, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
sorry.
they won't decide if there's a term limit, then that decision's already been made for them. They can't
Correct.
stay.
So before they vote, they're considering all of that, right? I mean, we're operating under the understanding that, I am at least, that voters can be informed when making the decision. So what we're deciding on, I mean, we're not saying that there's term limits if we vote for it. We're voting on a charter language to be sent to the voters, and they will decide whether or not we want term limits in the city of Seminole or not. And if they believe, like maybe some members here do that, well, I'm going to be limited by somebody I like who's good, then they'll probably vote no. But if they like to change it, then they'll vote yes. I mean, that just empowers the voter. I don't think this is such a radical concept that it's not worth giving the voters an opportunity to choose whether or not they want the term limits.
So what you're saying is to put it on a ballot?
Well, that's what we're doing.
Everything we decide here would be going to a ballot.
To go to the ballot for the voters.
Yeah, all the
not our way or
changes
the
we
highway.
made, except for the Scrivener's, errors.
I was just going to clarify the process. What the duty of this committee is to make recommended changes to the council. The council will look at all the changes and decide which ones they like, which ones they don't, and which ones they like will then go to the voters of the city, and the electorate will get to vote on if they want those changes or not. So there's a kind of a couple level process.
Oh, okay.
So if this committee determines, okay, we want to put term limits before the council, and the council sees it and says, okay, we want to put that before the voters to see what they think, and then the voters come out and say, nope, we don't like that whole term limit thing, or yes, we like the whole term limit thing. So there's a couple steps in there. It could never go to the electorate because the council might say, we don't like that recommendation.
Oh, okay. So there is another step.
So that, and that's, I don't want
to the ballot.
I just want to talk about the process a little bit. So
I
while you're
understand.
making, I think you guys are kind of getting to here, we're putting term limits in the charter. This is the level of the process that you guys are at right now.
But
So
typically, a charter review committee makes recommended changes that they are advocating.
correct. Yes.
So that is a little bit contrary to what is being explained. They're saying throw it out there and throw it out and see what the people want to do. That typically this body is making the changes. We're not asking them, do you think that the city should have a resolution for establishing a charter review committee? You are recommending that they do have it, and that's what you're recommending going on the ballot. Everything you have recommended so far is that you're recommending that the city, you're going to tell the city council, you're recommending that these items be incorporated in your charter. And you're an advocate that they be in the charter. And correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Attorney, but my understanding is that you're putting things in there that you are advocating be changed. Then the council will look at it and see if they want to advance it to the voters. So if you are taking a position to make a change, you are recommending that change be made in the charter. And that would be the effect of a positive vote.
Correct. And I was just trying to make the distinction because I think that there was a little bit of talking over when we were talking about putting it to the voters. It was putting the we already have term limits built in because the voters get to go vote versus no, the voters will, if this is adopted, the voters will get to vote on whether or not they want to put that in the charter. So I was just trying to make the distinction.
And that's
perhaps
not,
I did not
and just,
clarify it.
Right, and I apologize. That was not my intent. I mean, it's just, it was kind of an example. If that's their mind frame, they would vote against the recommendation. So this is just, again, a starting point that will then go to the city council. And then if still gets approved, then goes to the voters. And as far as the effect, I mean, I think, Madam City Manager, talking about, everybody will have their motivations as to why they vote for a recommendation. But anything we recommend technically will be something that's different than the charter, or else we wouldn't be recommending it. So to me, I have my personal views on the matter, and I believe in term limits, but I also believe that a council member can also vote in the affirmative to advocate because they believe the voters should have a choice on the matter. And so the motivation, it doesn't govern our motivations as to why we would vote to recommend something on the charter. It doesn't mean you're so gung-ho about term limits that, that's why you did it. It could be because of the exact reason that I stated, that I think it's worth having a conversation by the electorate as to whether or not they want to decide it.
And I think we underestimate the voters. Yeah, okay, maybe people say, I like that name, I picked that name. But I think the majority of people actually do their homework. They may not attend council meetings, they may not want to be that involved, and they read the information. And when they do have a gripe, they will bring it to the front, okay? But I think, there is always good and bad to every decision we can make. I may want my grass to be mowed at 4 inches and everybody else wants theirs at 2. That doesn't mean my is wrong. I think it just gives everybody an opportunity to have a voice in our city. I think if someone wants to run and they say, okay, there's term limits, I like that. I like term limits myself, okay, and that's mainly because of Congress and, our major government. But I just think it's just better to just, some people may just keep voting for there's no seat 1, no seat 2, and then you wind up with the same ones all the time because the poor slob at number 3 slot doesn't get enough votes because it's the top 2 that they're picking. And I think it just gives the people an opportunity. And like what we're doing was we're recommending based on who we talk to in our neighborhoods and our council people is this is their voice as well. Okay, they may not have showed up, but we do talk to our neighbors and we have conversations about politics and the way things are in our town. And, it's like, okay, I remember talking to half of my neighborhood. Most everybody likes term limits. There are some that don't. Their viewpoints is theirs and it's valid for them, just as it's valid for those that want term limits. So I don't know. I just think it's just a recommendation to go to city council, to go to the voters, and let them decide what they want to do. We're only a small portion of our community,
Madam City Manager, you had done in your years of experience and done some research. What's your, I'll just go yield to you basically. We had a brief conversation as it relates to term limits, as I guess mainly on the staff's point of view. When you as far as like looking for really good candidates and potential department heads or and just. I'd like to get your opinion if I could.
Well, I've just passed my 30-year mark in local government. I have never worked for a city that had term limits, nor would I choose to, given all things considered equal. The department head recruitment for a city that is financially stable like Seminole, politically stable like Seminole, knowing that if the person is doing a good job, will likely be reelected or could be reelected. I think there's 2 people in the room that could be the first one to tell you that incumbents don't always win. That incumbents, I'm looking at 2 people right here that can share that story in Seminole. So this is the smallest population city I've ever worked in. It's the first, one city that had 36,000 had 7 council members. So you have more council seats per capita typically in Seminole, 7 instead of 5. You also have a smaller population to pull from. Your state legislature, your county commission, which by the way, it has opted not to do the term limits. Your state legislator, your governor, et cetera, are big bases you choose from. Where in our community, we typically have 5 council members, we already have 7. And so when I'm recruiting, I always play that up as a positive. We're financially stable, we are, politically stable, and there is not a chance that there's always a chance that you're going to have a turnover in any given election. And I think that we've all seen that happen, that people can be ousted from office. But what you do with term limits, if I'm looking at a job from a professional standpoint, you guarantee that's going to happen. For example, if you say 9-year term limits, and when you start that clock running, we will have 3 consecutive elections in a row where the incumbents would be ineligible, and then maybe these 2 can't run, and then 2 new people come in, and maybe these 2 run a year later, but maybe they won't, but we know these 2 are gone, and then we know these 2 are gone. So you would have 3 elections in a row the way we're structured now at the end of the term limits, assuming none of the incumbents lose, and assuming that they choose to continue running, where you would have, in essence, in a 3-year period, potentially all new elected officials. I'm not sure how good that is for stability in a community, and when I'm recruiting a department head who is like my department head, the public works director, moved here from a very stable job. In fact, I thought I was going to have to send Kleenex when I was doing the background check from Crested Butte, who decided to move to Florida. He'd grown up in Daytona, but had lived in Hawaii and Colorado, and decided to take this job. I've got somebody as a department head from the city of Dunedin. I don't know, I can't tell you, but just my experience in hiring is that I always use that as a plus. That, and I will tell you, on the same token, that there have been other cities I've worked in, certainly not this one, where you perhaps maybe wish there was term limits, because you have that one person that, it would be turnover. But you know what, at the end of the day, the voters hopefully know best. But just you ask from a staff perspective, I use that as a recruiting tool. I would like to think that this community would generate enough people to fill the seats, but we are not a large community, and we do have a lot. 7 seats is a lot. So, and think about the challenges sometimes of filling board seats, and just on our boards and committees, and hopefully people going through the Citizens Academy, people serving on our boards and committees do become people going into the elected official position. But when you look, I know that Councilor Matthews has lost an election. I know that Councilor Barnhorn has lost an election. And so the history in the city is that there have been some people that have lost. I mean, you beat an incumbent when you ran. So, that it becomes a philosophical question, but you asked me from a staff perspective, and I would tell you that I use that as a recruiting tool to say that, look how financially stable we are, look how politically stable we are, and there's very little chance that we will have a mandated turnover. That's not to say that we wouldn't have a turnover, because when you go in my field, you know that any election can change the makeup of a council, but term limits will dictate that in fact happens if somebody's serving for so many years.
If we had this, if we decide on term limits, let's say 9 years, 3 terms, and everybody's clock begins now, in 9 years, will we not have a whole new council all at once?
Over the next 3 years after the 9 years.
Right. Because then everybody would begin their 9-year period now. And we could end up with more than half, or if not the whole council, all being new, all being forced out at one time.
Well, remember, this has to go before city council.
I understand that.
So I think we might be tilting on a wheel here that ain't gonna go anywhere, but.
Well, and I think they weigh heavily on your thoughts and recommendations, I'm sure.
Yeah. So we have a couple that have expressed, I think, Bernie, you were in favor of the thing, aren't you?
Yes.
Term limits? Okay, I wasn't positive. I was getting mixed messages there. So, okay.
And one thing to just before we move on, and there are comparable cities, comparable populations who do have term limits, it was alluded to at last meeting by Assistant City Attorney that Tarpon Springs has I mean, they're a little bigger, but not by much, and so, and I recall you saying it works well over there, it seems to
I will
just,
challenge you.
I mean, it works over there. I don't know how well.
Yeah.
I'm not going to
Just
comment
before
on that.
you
It
go
works.
there, I will tell you, look at their turnover in their upper level positions, look at their city manager, read news articles over the past 10 years. And that's all I'll say about Tarpon Springs. I didn't say anything the other night, but if you want to talk about political stability and ability to hire staff that stays.
I didn't say anything. I just said they have it in their charter.
You did say it worked well.
I said it works.
I remember it worked well.
I said it works. You can go back and watch the video.
Well, we might have.
So,
There are other communities, just from a legal perspective, this is not unheard of, but
right.
y'all have already had that discussion.
And this is it's a great city. There's talented people in this city. It's growing. I mean, by the time we take the next census, I think it's going to be much larger than the 17,000, which I think was counted the last census. I mean, we're probably around 20,000. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of good, hardworking, talented people here in the city of Seminole that can contribute if given the opportunity, if not intimidated by the power of incumbency, if not, quite frankly, outgunned just naturally, just the advantages the incumbency gives somebody that I alluded to last meeting. Just the fact that a city council member can just by sitting on this dais alone can say something impactful and it gets covered by the Seminole Beacon. A challenger would have to pay, to get their message across, through political ads and mailers and so forth. That city council person can hold a press conference and say, I've got an important thing. There are advantages to incumbency, not to mention if somebody deals with the city may be hesitant to support a challenger. When the sitting person is being challenged, and so there are advantages to incumbency that we can't simply ignore. That I think just opens up government for others to participate in without intimidation.
I agree. I think you underestimate the ability of a person to just come in and step in. I don't think if I decided to do something, it wasn't much of a learning curve for me, because if you decide to run, then there's going to be people that just want to run and don't want to really do too much. They just want to run for whatever reason. Maybe they get elected, and you're going to have that no matter what. But I think that there's inherently, most people who do run want to do something good for the most part. And, I mean, to Trish Springer, if it takes her 3 years to get up to speed, that seems like, I'm sorry, that's just like a long term. I mean, it shouldn't be that hard to kind of get involved with the city if you do just study up on it and you want to run because you want to make a change, you want to participate, because inherently that's why we're all here. We wanted to participate, we wanted to help, we wanted to do something. So I think even though it's a small sacrifice on our part, I think it's still, people, and like Bernie says, it's hard to run against an incumbent because you may not know everybody in town. I'm sick and tired of seeing somebody's face in the paper all the time. I am. It's like, really? Again? So.
I'm hardly ever on there.
That's just.
Oh, I thought you meant.
I would just love to see some of those people come to council meetings, and then they can be heard.
So, I think what we've heard from those in favor and those opposed. I think I'd like to get a consensus based on, just to see where we want to take this to, if we want to present it to council for a charter amendment to move forward. So, Ann, I know you are. Bernie, I think you are. In favor or not?
No.
Well, let me. I'm sorry,
Are
Mr.
you still
Chair.
lobbying for this?
what I mean, if I may, I would like to put a specific motion on the floor,
Okay.
and then
All right.
we take a recorded vote on the motion. So, and then drafting, can handle the specifics. I propose 3-year terms, 3 terms of 3 years for the city council, and so going forward.
That's your motion?
That's my motion.
I'm for it.
That's a second, I assume, from Ann, correct?
That has to be a second.
Was that a second?
Second, yep.
So, discussion? All right, guess we'll get a roll call vote.
Tricia Coughlin,
No.
John Cowan,
No.
Trish Haynes,
No.
Karen Shaw,
Yes.
Rosemary Mills,
No.
Ann Peachy,
Yep.
Sharon Spahn.
No.
So we'll leave that off then.
We'll try again in 5 more years, Bernie.
I believe this came up last year too. Were you on the committee you were the year before that?
Charter review comes every 5 years, though.
No, but this issue was discussed last charter.
Cool, maybe we'll bring it up next year. No
Yeah.
problem.
Okay, so that's the other business. That was a very good discussion. Thank you all for your participation. Any other business?
Mr. Chairman, just, oh, no, this is great. This is going to help. Wow. You had asked about what else needs to go on the agenda. The city attorney has the unenviable job of writing the ballot language that you have voted on. And I think from a staff perspective, it's very important that you see that language and you feel comfortable that it represents what you have decided to do. And so I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, at your next meeting that be, you always have public comment, but then that be an agenda item so that this committee can make sure that from staff and especially from your attorney, that they have captured the essence of what you're recommending.
And our next meeting is scheduled for April 22nd, correct?
Correct. Probably our last one. Don't look at me like that. It might be.
As long as I have good ballot language, right?
I'm assuming. Do you know a good lawyer? Okay. All right.
Fantastic lawyer.
You are. Okay, so any other business?
I just want to say that I appreciate Counselor Matthews and Quinn and Springer who were able to be here. I know some of the other counselors and the mayor had conflicts, but for taking the time to come and speak with us. And
I agree.
yes, thank you.
And I will share with you, not just through the Charter Review Committee can items be put on the ballot. I think Mr. Matthews will bear out that, was it 3 years ago, the council actually initiated charter language. So it's not only every 5 years that the citizens could petition the council to consider doing that. So they always have the ability, as long as they meet the same deadline that you're under, to make, and they realized there was a gap in the attendance policy, I believe. And the council advanced that and it was approved, and that was after the last charter meeting, our charter committee ballot issues, that was one other. So there's more than one way that items can get to the charter.
All right, so the next meeting, as the city attorney mentioned, is on April 22nd, Monday at 6:30. Go ahead and mark our calendars. Everyone's good for that?
Yep.
All right, and now, the most exciting part, we'll get a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
There you go.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No roll
Seeing
call.
none? No, we won't need one for that one.
we don't
Thank you,
need a
Madam City
discussion,
Manager,
right?
for that. All right, thank you all. See you all in a few weeks. I know I need